Okay, so thanks very much, Dan. The next session of our meeting tonight is me doing a presentation celebrating the history of Joseph Banks Reserve. So I'm going to now share my screen and hope it is as successful as Dan's. It is a very large presentation. Okay. As we know, 2020 has been a very big year for the community in terms of fires and COVID and change and uncertainty. But before all that started, 2020 was going to be a big year for the Australian Plant Society because we're celebrating 50 years of the Joseph Banks Native Plants Reserve at Kareela. And also 250 years of Joseph Banks collecting plants at Botany Bay. And to mark this occasion, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which is mostly just photos, very similar to the style of presentation I did for Sutherland Group's 50th anniversary back in 2013. So what I'd like to do is just show you some slides. And I'd just like to say at the very beginning that as with any sort of attempt at history or, recollecting the past, this is not comprehensive, but it is just from my perspective. And that means it's based on the photos that I have easily available, the photos that I've been able to find easily, and photos that I might have taken when I had a camera. So you can certainly pick the era when I got a digital camera. So I just wanted to say at the very beginning, if anyone does have any other photos or anything to add or correct, please let me know because I will be updating this. And I think we will be putting it on YouTube, but probably just the presentation and not with me talking. Okay, so although we are celebrating the reserve starting in 1970, I think it's important to recognise, of course, that the land existed for many, many years well before that, well before 1770. So I just wanted to recognise that the country is Dharawal country and existed for many years before 1770. When Captain Cook arrived in Botany Bay in April with Joseph Banks as a very wealthy English young gentleman who had paid for his passage on the trip, and Joseph Banks was accompanied by Daniel Solander, the Swedish botanist. And it's just interesting to note that that very famous portrait of James Cook was actually commissioned by Joseph Banks on his return from their 3-year voyage. So in 1770, Cook was at Botany Bay, and at the top there is the map that he drew when he was in Botany Bay in 1770, and just underneath it is the modern map of the area showing where Joseph Banks Native Plants Reserve is at Kareela. And as I've said before, we don't really know for sure, but I just like to think that perhaps, Banks and Solander did make their way up the Georges River, and who knows, they might have stepped foot in the vicinity of Joseph Banks Reserve. So just, if you go back a few years before 1970, in 1963, the Society for Growing Australian Plants, the Sutherland Group, had its very first meeting in 1963 at Engadine. And it's that society which became the Australian Plant Society. So the group had been meeting for a few years in the 1960s. And then as the 1970 bicentenary approached, the group started to make plans to have a reserve to commemorate that bicentenary. Several years ago, one of our members, Maurice Henke, wrote a history about Sutherland Group, and I've just got a couple of extracts from that history. So in 1969, he said that planning at the state and local government level was underway, and the Society for Growing Australian Plants, in conjunction with another community group called the Sutherland Nature Conservation Society, made an approach to Sutherland Council to reserve land at Bates Drive, Kareela. And it's interesting, in 1969, they hadn't decided whether it was going to be named after Joseph Banks or Daniel Solander. And we also are very lucky to have a recollection from one of our members at the time, Ray Witchard, and he wrote in 2009 just some early thoughts of those early years of SCAP. We worked there on 3 or 4 occasions, getting the weeds out of the bush. They had a connection with council and they made a collection of native plants in the area. At the time, of course, the land was just natural bush. So moving on to 1970, by August 1970, council had provided fencing and water supply, very important, and some of those planting and infrastructure works were underway. Remember when stamps were 5 cents? That was a while ago. In 1971, a management committee was formed, and it had the members were from the Society for Growing Australian Plants and also the Sutherland Nature Conservation Society. Some of the work they did in 1971 was plant over 1,000 new plants, build a trail, clear a parking area, and that also identified over 200 Indigenous species on the site. We're also lucky to have another recollection by someone involved in the early days, and I happened to run into Peter Loxley from Como at an event at Bonnet Bay, and he wrote us some thoughts in 2013, and he said, I've just highlighted the interesting bits there, particular bits there. The developers set aside the most rugged and difficult area to develop into a garden. So in those days, the site would have been a very difficult site to develop housing on, but of course it makes an ideal site for a native garden because it has fantastic sandstone features, and the topography makes it a very interesting site. And when he was working there in the early 70s, the work at that stage mainly involved clearing paths and edging their borders with logs, making steps using rocks and weeding and planting. And certainly when volunteers work in the reserve today, we do see that evidence from the 1970s where we uncover all sorts of beautifully made rock walls. Some of them are concreted together, some of them are just naturally placed to create garden beds on top of all the rocky outcrops. And they did need extra help from council for the water, particularly in the rainforest and fern areas. Now, this sign was a photo taken in 2014, but this was a sign that used to be the entrance to the reserve that just explained the history of the reserve. And if you just keep in mind the state of that sign when we come to 2009. So the reserve did used to have that history explaining its early days and the role of the reserve as a tribute to Joseph Banks for his pioneering botanical work in this region. Now in 1977, although the reserve had started as a voluntary project and it was being managed on a voluntary basis, it became obvious this was not practical, and Sutherland Council assumed major responsibility. And ever since then, Sutherland Group members have continued to participate in monthly working bees at the reserve. So we've maintained our interest for over 50 years in the reserve. Now, of course, the data is a bit sparse as to what happened in the 70s and 80s at the reserve, but I did find this photo in a book about the history of Sutherland Shire, and it shows a timber walkway that was constructed along the eastern cliff overlooking Sylvan Vale. And you can see it's made of timber with timber supports, and over time the timber just rotted away. So unfortunately, that walkway's been demolished, but it was a lovely way to get a close look at the lovely sandstone outcrops we've got there. In 1986, that was the year that marked the start of our annual Spring Walks Day, which the Society held at the reserve to showcase Australian native plants. We used to hold them in autumn and spring, then over time we just moved to one a year. And spring obviously is a great time to showcase the reserve and what's in flower. I'll just show you when you take people on guided walks on our Spring Walks Day, we just point out obviously things that are in flower, just to introduce people to what's at the reserve. And these are just photos I've taken over the years at the reserve. Obviously lots of Karelias where we have more sun at the reserve. Something pretty significant happened in 1987. So coming up to another bicentenary, and that was the Bicentennial of Australia. In 1987, we got a bicentenary grant to buy a plant labelling machine. And we used that machine to make labels for the reserve. So that was a really important educational feature of the reserve. And the big photo there shows John Arney demonstrating how to make labels with one of Peter Shelton's sons there. That was in 2011. And the other photo with a close-up view of the machines in 2013. So it is a very manual process of assembling letters. But that was a really important project that we've been involved in ever since then. And I'd just like to take this moment to especially recognise the tremendous work of one of our members, Aileen Phipps. And it's a pity Aileen's not with us tonight, so that we can recognise her contribution at the reserve. So this just shows a newspaper article from 2009 when Aileen received the Cook Community Award, which recognised her fantastic contribution at the reserve, coordinating all the label making and doing a lot else at the reserve as well. So a tremendous contribution there, which I've just put this photo in for 1988 because that's when we really started doing the labels. Also in 1988, we happened to win a Keep Australia Beautiful Award, and the plaque is displayed in the kiosk. And if you look really closely, it's the cream coloured one just at the top, sort of under the roof. And it says we won 3rd place in I think the Suburban Awards. So I'm not really sure about the details, but it's there up on the wall. Now recognise any people here in this picture? I think I can see Leonie Hogue there, amongst others. So in 1991, we held a seed workshop, and this area is right where the kiosk is now, and you can see the fence there in Manuka Place, and that area is now a garden bed. But we had a seed workshop there in 1991. Also from about that era, one of our older members, the late Connie McPherson, who was our conservation officer, was promoting the reserve in the leader, talking about birds being attracted by native plants there. What else have we got? Now this is where it starts to, you think, oh, where is that and what does that look like today? In 1993, we had the opening of the wedding or the celebration terrace area. I can see Leonie, Aileen Phipps is there, Peter Old is there somewhere as well, and a few people in the background. So you can sort of get a picture of the vegetation there at the reserve. Obviously looking very lush. And in 1995, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the reserve. And just to show the longevity of the contribution of our current president, Leonie Hogue was the president back in 1995, and her name was on the plaque when the plaque was unveiled with Sutherland councillor Lorraine Rodden, the mayor at the time. So that's how long Leonie's been involved in the reserve as well, with her tremendous contribution. I'll just go through a few more slides to get us up to a few more years. Just to let everyone know that in 1997, that's when the Society for Growing Australian Plants, we changed our name to the Australian Plant Society because we do more than just grow plants. And we've continued our interest in the reserve since then as well, of course. We usually hold an end of year gathering at the reserve, and the photos that we have of those gatherings are a great record of our members at the time, and just showing sort of the different picnic areas at the reserve and what the vegetation looked like there as well. So again, I can spot Gwen Harden there in the front. I think she's on our meeting tonight. Joan Deegan I can see as well. Aileen's there, Gwen Caddy, CG's, Amy's, Fuller's at the front there. Now in the year 2000 was another important marker. It was the first year that the Royal Easter Show decided to have an Australian plants competition, and although most people in the society are not into competitive plant growing, it was of course a great opportunity to showcase Australian plants to the huge audience at the Royal Easter Show. So Leonie Hogue coordinated our entries in that very first year and used flowers from Joseph Banks Reserve and with flowers from members' gardens as well. And this was a great way to get publicity in the leader each year. So this is a lovely photo of Leonie with Jill and Murray in 2014. And Leonie has been coordinating our entries at the Easter Show for every year since the year 2000, until we had, of course, COVID this year. Another important initiative in the year 2000 was when we installed our first set of interpretive signs. And in this photo here, at the very base of that sign, you can see a Banksia, which is this one, Banksia Blechnifolia, and that's the one that Lisa mentioned she's planted as well. It's absolutely fabulous in terms of the softness of the new flowers and the fact that flowers just emerge so close to the ground. Sutherland, as I mentioned earlier, did continue to have monthly working bees, and we tend to focus on a particular area called the Sutherland Group Garden. And in that area, we have a plaque commemorating one of our members who was was the visionary behind our coast plants. Another Christmas photo from 2006. I can see John Aitken there, standing up at the table. The CG's there. Another example of our media attention with our Easter Show prizes. Leonie's there with Tony Knight, the gardener at the reserve at the time. And I've just got a couple of photos showing what the reserve looked like sort of broadly through sort of the early 2000s. So this is the old entry sign and the Sutherland Group garden area. And we had some water features, including a pond near the big terrace over in the Sunny Garden. And the Sunny Garden, which is not looking very sunny there, actually had a picnic table with a roof. And I might just leave this half of the presentation there now, because the next slides go into what happened in 2009 and how we initiated a campaign that actually has led to a lot of change at the reserve over the next 10 years. We'll just, in showing you what the reserve looked like, say in the 2000s, some water features that were looking a bit sort of dark and shady and not that well maintained. Some picnic tables with some roofs. What else did we have? So In 2009, Sutherland Group initiated a campaign where we met with the CEO and the Mayor of Sutherland Council to try and improve the Sutherland Council focus on the reserve. We just felt it had become a bit forgotten and overlooked. And following that meeting, Sutherland Group undertook a number of initiatives ourselves there, and Council also undertook to spend a lot of money on some infrastructure upgrades. The photo there shows what the work compound at the very top at the car park looked like in 2009. And then the other photo just shows part of the car park as well. And if you're not familiar with the reserve, I just say keep an eye on that telegraph pole for what it looks like later. Sorry, my mouse is being a bit sensitive there. So moving on, so one of the things that happened in 2009 was a controlled burn in what was called our natural area. So this was an area that resembled a natural vegetation, or showed the natural vegetation on site, but it hadn't been burned as it would have been naturally. So there was a controlled burn there, and it was fascinating to see how quickly some plants actually recovered from the fire within just a week. There was new growth on grass trees and apicomic growth from some of the eucalypts and angophoras. And 2 years later, this photo, taken from exactly the same spot, recognise the rock, shows what it looked like 2 years after the burn. And we also had things like funnel flowers come up. So that was fantastic. So I've skipped a year or two there. Just some other photos to sort of illustrate the concept of, I suppose, change over time that we all have to accept. We had a lovely avenue of tree ferns, which just got taller and taller each year, and they used to benefit from the seepage through the sandstone cliffs there. But as the climate has become drier and there's been less moisture, our avenue of tree ferns has suffered, and it doesn't look like that anymore. And then we also have a Wallamite pine, which again, I think just conveys the concept of, you know, plants change, but then some of them stay the same and don't change over a long time. It's great that we've got that down in our shady garden near Bates Drive. Just some photos of some activities we've held at the reserve. Some photos from our spring walks in 2010. These were probably taken at the end of the day. It's looking very shady there. I can see Doug Rickard in the back there. I think he was on the meeting tonight. Also in 2010, we hosted one of the very first of the APS New South Wales annual get-togethers at the reserve. You can see Leonie there in the red leading people around. Another one of our little huts with the roof there and the kiosk. We just kept winning prizes in the Easter show, and we just kept getting publicity in the leader, which was great. So Leonie there with one of the gardeners at the reserve, Gilbert. And in 2011, more prizes and more articles. In fact, I think we took out, it might have been the champion ribbon there. And also in 2011, we won a Sutherland Council Volunteer of the Month award, and there should be some familiar faces there. And Leonie's holding the prize-winning ribbon there as well. So it was in 2010 that Sutherland Council started the monthly bush care working bees on the first Thursday. Jason's been the officer there for, well, 10 years now. And I just had taken some photos. I was trying to demonstrate, you know, what we do on working bees. And I took these photos of Gwen Basigi, who was very camera shy, but we had a weedy Banksia to start with. And after Gwen had been hard at work, it looked much better. Sadly, that Banksia is no longer with us. We do have some in other places though. We do actually work hard on our working days, but we also have morning tea in a couple of different spots, and you can see some of the regular faces there from our working bees as well. More publicity in 2011 to promote a Seniors Week walk. So Sutherland Council has been running a walk at the reserve for Seniors Week in March each year. And we also had our spring walks again in 2011. And the refreshments was a very popular area, particularly you have a seat and have something to eat that Jan Taylor was closely involved in. Christmas gathering in 2011, and you might notice we're meeting in an area that sort of has grass underneath, but it's not looking too healthy. It was always very shady and the grass never grew very well in that area where the tables were. This is a photo from 2011 showing what the celebration terrace looked like near our big pond. This terrace had 4 different levels, and in 2017 it was remodelled to reduce the number of levels to make it more usable. Sorry, my sensitive mouse again. The Acacia Garden in 2011, again just showing how sort of extensive the vegetation was at that time. Things have certainly thinned out since then. Spring walks in 2012 with Angus Stewart, and you can just see a pile of books to the left there. I think he was promoting one of his recently launched books there at that event. The grevilleas are always popular plants at Joseph Banks Reserve over in our sunny garden area behind the kiosk, and we've certainly had lots of grevilleas come and go over time, but whenever they're there they always look fantastic in flower. And after meeting with council in 2009, they prepared various master plans to spend money, and if you just look behind me on my bookshelf, I actually found our big poster of the master plan, which I had rolled up. So I got that out and stuck it up. And to prepare for the works that were going to take place, we had to move where we stored our plant labels and build a new storage facility in the kiosk in between the 2 toilets there. And that just shows you what some of the area looked like at the very top near the car park with the barbed wire. So it was in 2014 when Sutherland Council finally got underway with the master plan works using a contractor, and it was a bit confronting for most of us to see equipment of this size getting stuck into the Sutherland Garden area where we had been working for many years. We knew they were going to do it, but it was still a bit confronting. And see that telegraph pole in the top photo? Keep an eye on that telegraph pole. That's what's now the main entry area where the sign is. Another surprising element of the master plan works was one day Leonie went to inspect a path into the natural area and found they'd placed the seat facing up the slope and not out towards the view, which was, we thought, an interesting position, but apparently it was all carefully planned. Also, they insisted to us. So this is a view of looking up the slope at the Acacia Garden before it had been replanted. Leonie and Claire there. And you can see those 2 tables there at the front. They were upgraded to become the new barbecue area in 2017. And as part of the upgrade, we got a lovely new entry sign and an entry sign with a map. And that's just where the telegraph pole is. Ralph took a lovely photo of the Sutherland Group garden area, which was council used on the cover of their new brochure for the reserve, which was great to see, with a Banksia Blechnifolia in lovely flower there. Council planned to have an official opening of the stage 1 works in November 2014, and pretty much, I think it was the morning of the event, they cancelled the official opening. So we went along anyway wearing our t-shirts. There were a few councillors that turned up and we celebrated anyway. Some familiar faces there as well, Aileen at the front. This is what the entry area looked like in 2015, so just less than a year after the works, and that's that telegraph pole that used to be in the middle of the old compound. to help give you some perspective there. We had our very big Spring Walks Day in 2015 to sort of show people the new areas. It was very well attended, so popular that the car park was overwhelmed. Angus Stewart was very popular, running a number of workshops through the day. On our guided walk days, we lead people in groups around the reserve, and Claire was pointing out a new garden bed there, which used to be, this area used to be paved, and a garden bed was created there. And in 2017, Sutherland Council started the second stage of its works. Well, actually it was sort of stage 2 and 3 combined. And what was the old barbecue area with 2 timber tables and a very big barbecue. Oops, sorry, I need to go back. They got the earth moving equipment in, they relayed concrete, they built 2 new electric barbecues, and they also extended, remodeled the terrace, created a deck, and turned the old pond into a dry creek bed. And that's the deck without any timber on it. In 2017, in July, we did have an official opening of the works with the Mayor, who said it was the first time he'd been to the reserve. And that was a lovely, lovely occasion. And we had a bit of a barbecue, and it was lovely to have everyone there for that event. And again, you can sort of get a sense of the vegetation just a couple of years ago there, looking sort of thicker than it is now. In 2017, at the same time, that's when we installed our 23 interpretive signs that were partly funded by a federal government grant. So there are now a total of 28 signs through the reserve, matching the original signs we did back in 2000. We started to move to a different type of event at the reserve, having smaller walk and talk events a couple of times a year on different topics. This one was on wattles, and you can see Acacia Binervia is just in the background there in flower. The Acacia Garden is always spectacular in full flower, and we really showcase the diversity of different species there, from ground covers to shrubs to trees. Again, the acacias come and go, but they always look spectacular. Should recognise some faces there from our meeting tonight. So even in just a year, the colour of the deck had changed. Didn't look quite so new, but that was a lovely event. And then in 2009, we used the terrace to have a celebration of some of our more senior members. I think everyone in that photo was at least 90. So that was a special, special day to celebrate people that have made a big contribution to Sutherland Group, particularly Aileen, who was 90 on that day. Another event we had in 2019 was a walk and talk to celebrate the Botanic Gardens Day. And again, you can see how bushy it's looking over there in the sunny garden on the right-hand side photo. Another Christmas gathering. The deck's probably faded a little bit more. And that just brings us to 2020. And I was thinking about how would we describe 2020, the 50th year of the reserve. Perhaps we would call it a year of resilience. The reserve still had lots of plants in flower. Our Banksia robor started to recover after the drought. It's fantastic at just pumping out new growth. It's great. We're still working hard with our working bees. And Anne and Jan were still having as much fun as usual. And it's a pity they're not on our meeting tonight to share that, because they've been such a big part of the working bees over the years as well. So that's my celebration, a very personal reflection, just based on the photos that I've had easily available, but if you have any others, please do let me know. It's been 50 years so far, and hopefully the reserve will continue to flourish for the next 50.